Hey everybody, Resident Loser Jeremy here, and today I've got a special one. We have an actual attorney on the show. We do an interview. I've wanted to get this guy on for a long time to just ask general questions, specific legal questions regarding our industry, what we do. This was actually a perfect time because he came out with a set of templates that are for recording studio owners, people working in recording studios, dealing with that client relationship, as well as estimates, studio rules, stuff like that. He has created a template that we can go on and purchase. I use these documents personally. I love them. My clients appreciate having them because they know what to expect from me, and I know what to expect from them. We actually have Brenden on a couple videos, and this is the first one. We're going to kind of talk about business entities and stuff, but in the second video we go on to talk about very detailed legal things that are kind of specific just to what we do. If you're interested in checking out his templates for recording studio owners, check out the link in the description. You can use the coupon code RECSTUDIOLOSER for 25% off. I'm not sponsored by this in any way. I don't get any kind of kickback. I personally use these documents and they have helped me immensely. I highly recommend you getting them. It is a little bit of an investment, but keep in mind, this is not something that's meant to trap anyone. This is to protect both parties involved. And it's just one small part of having a successful business. So let's get to the first interview with Brenden. All right, hey Brenden, thanks for being a part of the call. I already gave kind of a quick little rundown of who you are and why, and there's going to be a couple videos with you in here. But I want to talk real quick about some questions some people are asking, but really fast, could you just give us a background of who you are, what you do, why we should listen to you?
Yeah, so I am an attorney here in Colorado. I'm also, my bar membership originates out of Indiana. Did the whole law school thing, took the bar exam. I'm a real lawyer. So I do this every day. My day job is corporate and compliance counsel for a company here in Colorado. I talk with businesses all the time. I negotiate with businesses all the time. We're forming contracts that are worth tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes millions of dollars. And my job is basically talking with them on the phone, working with the documents and making sure that the relationship is set up appropriately so that we reduce risk and provide the services and products to the customer appropriately.
And real quick, this is in the other video that we've done together already, but you've created kind of a package specifically for people running recording studios, like myself, recording studio owners, whether it's commercial or at home, where you've put together a list of documents, essentially like contracts, estimate forms in a template form that people can cater all their own to basically be covered in whatever relationship they have, right?
That's right. So as a recording studio owner, it behooves you to sign a contract with every client who comes in the door, just to set the basis for the relationship. So that includes a contract to use to set the rules. It includes that estimate form that you discussed. It does include some studio rules. So if you allow or don't allow smoking in your building, for example, you can change those rules however you need. And it also includes a document that basically tells you these are the things you might consider changing to align with your particular situation.
And they can find that document if they're interested on your website. There will be a link in the description. And by the way, you can use coupon code RECSTUDIOLOSER for 25% off of that. Honestly, I use these contracts. My clients appreciate it. It's a deal for what it is. If you want to be covered and know that you're covered, take a look at that. But I wanted to get into some questions, and one in particular, Tyler asks, how to transition from doing recording or sound work as a side hustle with no paperwork or legal commitment to a very structured business type transaction, starting to ask clients to agree to contracts, etc.
Yeah, so Tyler, this is a great question. I think the first thing to think about is that even though you don't have a piece of paper that forms a contract, you're verbally forming a contract with your client. And that's just as enforceable as a piece of paper. It's a lot harder to prove, and I talk about that in another video. But keep in mind, even just discussing it and coming to an agreement verbally is a contract. Now, you're right to ask, should I start getting this on paper? Absolutely. I would always recommend forming a contract on paper. And the templates that I've provided are a great way to do that. You should think about, what are my circumstances? Am I just running a recording studio out of my basement? Am I in a shared space? Am I in a building? Am I traveling around and recording in different locations? And those documents support all of those things. But one thing that you might want to consider is forming an LLC. And I say LLC and not a corporation for a particular purpose. As a sole proprietor, the liability for anything that goes wrong is on you as an individual, and that can be kind of dangerous, right? If your equipment starts a fire somewhere, you might be personally responsible for the result of that fire. When you form an LLC, you might think about dumping the assets, assigning your equipment, your lease if you're leasing a studio space, any of your contracts that you already have that has been signed as a sole proprietor. You might consider assigning those to your LLC, because what that does is it sort of creates a barrier between you as an individual and your business. And if in that same circumstance, your LLC's equipment starts a fire, it's going to be a whole lot harder to come after you as an individual for the results of that fire. What will happen probably is that you'll end up folding the LLC. You'll still have to pay money, right? You won't get out of it scot-free, but you should have an insurance plan and all that stuff that goes along with that. But your personal assets will be at less risk of going to contribute to restitution for that fire, right? So if you own your home and you're a sole proprietor, your home may not be affiliated with your business at all. But if you haven't organized as an LLC and something happens and you owe somebody a lot of money as a result, your home, you could be forced to sell your home to pay that amount of money off. And that's really kind of the idea behind forming a legal fiction, right? An LLC or a corporation. A corporation, I try not to recommend those unless you're doing business in multiple states or you have some legitimate need for that kind of a structure. It does have tax advantages and benefits, but it also requires a lot more process, and you have to be able to prove that you've done certain things as a corporation to keep that status. And if you don't, nobody might do anything right away, but then you encounter what's called piercing the corporate veil if something bad does happen. And if you haven't kept up with the requirements of a corporation, then it's going to be very easy to pierce that corporate veil and get to your home just as if you were a sole proprietor anyway. An LLC doesn't have as many tax advantages, but is a lot easier to maintain as an individual. It doesn't require quite as much effort in terms of following processes and being able to prove that, but still provides a level of protection that's appropriate for most small businesses.
Well, that was the clearest it's ever been described to me. Makes me feel better about actually being an LLC.
Yeah, most of the time, an LLC is going to do exactly what you need it to do, and it's draw that line between your personal assets and your business assets. You can get insurance as an LLC. You can sign contracts as an LLC. You can have investors as an LLC too. Now, it requires a lot more effort to delineate all of that, but it doesn't require quite as much as a corporation does. And really, for most small businesses, there's no advantage to becoming a corporation rather than an LLC.
And it takes a lot of diligent note-taking as well.
That's right. You have to have annual meetings. You have to file certain paperwork with the state as a corporation. And if you don't do those things, you lose your status as a corporation and you probably end up as an LLC anyway.
Where was I going? It was going to be about DBAs.
Yeah.
I actually recently just did my first DBA because everything up to this point was my business's legal name, which got confusing for people, which started out as Whisper Label Group LLC, and now I have kind of a DBA as Whisper Studios, which is most of what I do. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's something a lot of people don't know, and honestly, I don't even know a whole lot about it having a DBA. Is that something
Yeah.
you're
So
familiar with that you could speak to?
very much so. One of the things that we do in my day job is we research legal entities, right? So we go to the Secretary of State's office, and when a company tells me that they're registered as Whisper Studios, that's the first thing I search. And when I don't find Whisper Studios, then I go to a website and I start looking around and poking around to see what I can find. And when I find Whisper Label Group LLC, that's the name I use on the contract. A DBA is sort of, so for those who don't know, a DBA means doing business as.
Yes, sorry.
And that's just an informal way of saying, my legal entity name is Whisper Label Group LLC, but I do business as Whisper Studios or Jeremy Mang or whatever it is, Recording Studio Loser. I can do business as a multitude of different names, and I can indicate that on the contract, but what you really need is to include your legal name on the contract. And you should be making those you're contracting with use their legal name as well. And if you don't have a registered entity, like an LLC or a corporation, you should be using your name as an individual. I would not sign an agreement under Brenden Macy Inc. I would sign under my name. I'm the individual. So it would be under my name. Now, I could say I'm doing business as anything I want, really. There's no real restriction on just saying you're doing business as. You don't have to register a DBA. It has advantages, especially as you get more towards a point in your career where you might need a trademark. A DBA registration is sort of a common law trademark designation, right? That's proof that at a minimum, this is when I started using this mark. And a lot of that comes into play much, much later on as you're registering trademarks and doing all of that. Most small business owners will never have a need for a trademark. That's just the way it is. But a DBA can sort of be your regional common law trademark designation and have some power behind it. I think almost all secretaries of state across the country accept doing business as registrations or fictitious name registrations, they're called in some states. But on the whole, they're really not that necessary. You can say you're doing business as whatever you need, as long as you're indicating your official legal entity name in that contract.
Where it helped with me was having started another business, then going to the studio, and then wanting to, like, with more and more corporate projects, even though you tell them to make the check out to this entity, well, they're working with Whisper Studios, so you get the check as Whisper Studios, and to make a bank account, that has to be like, you have to have a DBA. that's why I did it. That's like the bare bones functional reason, I feel like. And that has been a question where people, like, they want to change their name or adjust this. Do they want to go back and reform the entire company, or just do something like a DBA? And
it's pretty easy and cheap to file for a fictitious name registration. I think it's not something that should be intimidating. If you have a question about it, I would check your state's Secretary of State's website. They generally have information there about how to register as an LLC, even to kick the process off, or maybe a corporation. Again, I would really urge you to look more closely at an LLC. And then fictitious name or DBA registrations are also generally available through the Secretary of State's website. Most of the time they have forms that are very easy to fill out. You can pay the fee right there on the website. It's generally very inexpensive, and it's done, and you can print it off and have it ready to go. So that's probably the best way to do it. You pretty much don't need an attorney to do any of that stuff. If you want one, of course, we're happy to take your money and help you do it, but you probably don't need one.
And then past that, I mean, you're a legal business and you can start working. The only other paperwork and contract would be something like contracts that you've offered on your website.
Yeah. And then you might consider doing what's called an assignment. The way that I have drafted my assignment provision in my templates is that assignment, if I remember right, as the result of the sale of all or substantially all of the assets does not require the consent of the other party. So that's a lot of legal speak. But basically, if you're forming an entity and you're saying that this LLC is buying all of your studio equipment and taking all of the assets from you as an individual, that is all or substantially all of the assets, and you can assign that agreement to the LLC. Now you need to do that on paper. You need to make sure you're following some sort of legal or not legal. You need to follow some sort of process. You need to show that, yes, I'm assigning these named agreements that were signed on these dates to this new legal entity, and sign it and keep a copy. That will be helpful. Of course, that only applies to active contracts. I would not do that with contracts that have terminated. And the way that my template is drafted is that once the engagement with that client ends, that contract terminates. So all of the past projects that have been completed, those contracts are no longer active, and you wouldn't need to assign those to your LLC. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck doing hours and hours and hours of paperwork trying to go back and assign expired contracts or contracts that may be somewhat still alive with a client who's moved out of state, who's never coming back for no good reason, right? So that's sort of the thinking behind terminating the agreement after the engagement is over. And then when that client comes in for a new project, of course, you've updated your template so that now your legal entity name is on the template, your address, whatever.
You make it sound too easy. And it is something that's a very daunting when you're looking at the possibility of doing this like as like a real business. It's hard to know because you've never been down that road and you really only do it once. And honestly, even for me, when I did it, I've long forgotten how I did it because it's almost too easy and it doesn't require that kind of mental real estate. So don't let that be a barrier to entry to anybody thinking that's something you want to do, and the paperwork and getting all this stuff is hard. Where the bigger concerns lie are in something like dealing with clients, and that does, I mean, you could forget about the fact if you're legit or not. That's almost a bigger piece of the pie to me, and making sure you're protected in those situations.
Yeah, the best legal document is one that you never have to think about again. Once you get it done, that's it. And you don't think about it anymore because you never have to, because it was done right the first time. It was done in a way that protects everybody involved, and it never comes up again. And that's what I want to do, right? I want to make sure that the documents I'm providing are ones that once you sign it, you don't have to think about it anymore. It's common sense. Everybody's doing the right thing, and you can move on without having to think about that.
I love that idea. The less I have to think about something, the better. Well, man, I appreciate you being on here and answering questions like this, and that would actually work really well in the opening studio series. I think I'll put it there.
Perfect.
Well, we need to get you back on sometimes because I'm sure as people see these videos, there are going to be more questions that flow in. By the way, any of you watching now, I'm trying to convince this guy to start his own YouTube channel. So if you want to do that, pester him in the comments below. Well, thanks, dude. I appreciate you being on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Take it easy.
You too.
Welcome to the end of the video. You made it. You are awesome. Thanks for hitting the like button and subscribe button. It supports the channel in more ways than you can imagine. If you also want to support the channel, check out my new drum samples. This is my favorite drum setup I've ever done, and I made samples of it. Check out the link in the description below. Thanks, guys.